Welcome to the Inside Story. I'm Billy Hollowell, and today I'm joined by Christian Post reporter Ryan Foley. We're going to be talking about churches and advocacy groups and Christians gearing up for another election year. It's hard to believe we're heading fast toward 2024. Ryan, how you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Well, as always, thanks for coming on. And this story is interesting. We're going to be talking here, as I said, about churches and advocacy groups and, the Christian voter turnout. So let's just start, because I know you've covered this and you've written a few stories on it now. How are churches and advocacy groups, getting prepared for and gearing up in an attempt to maybe even boost Christian voter turnout next year?
Well, churches and advocacy groups are encouraging churches to embrace ballot harvesting. Since that term has a negative connotation, many prefer to use the term ballot collection instead. And ballot collection refers to where a person, sometimes a paid political operative, collects absentee ballots en masse ahead of Election Day. My Faith Votes, which is one of these advocacy groups working on this, is working on creating some guides and toolkits for churches, informing them of ways they can legally engage in ballot collection efforts. My Faith Votes CEO Jason Yates hopes that these guides will be ready by the end of this year or early next year.
And why do you think, you hinted at it before there, but why do you think there's sometimes that hesitation to engage in the ballot harvesting? What is it that maybe holds people back from embracing it?
Because of the belief that voting in person on Election Day is the superior method, and also there's concerns about the legality and ethics of the practice, as well as that it constitutes a political activity, which that's something that Jason Yates told me a lot of churches believe, that it constitutes a political activity and therefore it's kind of risky for a church to do it. Yates pushes back on the idea that ballot collecting is a political activity, calling it merely a civic activity.
Yeah, it's interesting, and this came up in the last election too, where certain groups of people, many conservative groups, even really believing very firmly in that early and mail-in voting were not the way to go, and that showing up. Why do you think, though? Why do some groups believe that the early voting and the mail-in voting are so essential?
Well, Yates believes that encouraging people to only vote on Election Day ends up suppressing some of the potential votes that can be brought in. And Tony Perkins, president of the Family Research Council, which is another advocacy group that's kind of encouraging churches to get involved in this kind of stuff, he hosted a community impact team training session a few weeks ago. And there he pointed out a real world example of how encouraging people to only vote on Election Day ended up suppressing some of the potential votes that can be brought in. He pointed to the Arizona elections last year where there were problems at polling places on Election Day. And he pointed out that the Democrats, the party that is not typically the favorite of most Christian advocacy groups, had taken advantage of early voting and absentee voting, so they were not affected by these problems like Republicans were. I guess Republicans ended up going home because there were problems at the polling places. At least that's what people say. So Republicans ended up losing the governor's race, the Senate race, the attorney general's race, and the secretary of state race in Arizona last year. Although they did win a few other statewide offices and maintain control of the state legislature and picked up seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. So I guess the thinking is it's possible that if more Christians had voted early, then the outcome of those elections would have been different. So it's
Yeah.
just a risk that things might not go as planned on Election Day. And also, I guess people might show up to the polls too late if there's a really long line. That's just a hypothetical, but still, it's people think it's a good idea, or increasingly think it's a good idea to make sure the votes are taken care of as early as possible.
If you live in the United States, you know that our country has a problem that seems to go forever unsolved, and it's affecting 60% of Americans. It's the cost of health insurance. Year after year, it just keeps going up and up. But there is a solution. It's called MediShare, the most trusted name in healthcare sharing. With a 98% customer satisfaction rating, their members love being part of an authentic Christian community. If this is your first time hearing about Medishare, they are an affordable Christian alternative to health insurance that could be saving your family hundreds of dollars every single month. Plus, telehealth and telebehavioral counseling are included with every membership. How amazing is that? And since it's open enrollment season, that means right now is the best time to make the switch. To learn more about Medishare, check out medishare.com/Christian Post now to see how much you could save every month. That's medishare.com/Christian Post. You can also click the link in this episode's show notes. It's so easy, it literally takes 2 minutes to calculate your cost savings when compared to your current health insurance provider. Again, that's medishare.com/Christian Post, or you can click the link in this episode's description. Our thanks to Medishare for sponsoring this episode.
Well, if the opposing side is doing it and you're not, and it's been effective for the opposing side, it does become a strategic problem, and that's regardless of which partisan side is doing it. In this case, you have the Democrats embracing it. It started during COVID and, really ramped up during COVID, didn't start, but now you have that situation where some people are primed to do that early. And so it is an interesting strategy. And I wanted to pivot to another story related to this that you have covered. This example out in California, there's a church out there that has been engaging in collecting voters, rallying voters together. Can you tell us a little bit about what that church is doing?
Yes, so this is Calvary Chapel Chino Hills, which is located in Southern California. They first began engaging in ballot collection at their mega church in 2020. Because of the church's location, it draws attendees from 4 different counties. And Gina Gleason, who runs the Real Impact Ministry at the church that spearheaded this initiative, told me that the church set up tables where people could drop off their ballots, and people walked up to whatever county they registered to vote in, and they dropped their ballots off to that volunteer, because I guess there were a bunch of signs for each county at this event. Then the volunteers make sure that all the ballots were dropped in the correct lockbox, and they separated them out, made sure they're once again correctly filled out. Then they take the ballots to the county registrar for their particular county.
Yeah, and this is interesting to see a church engage in this, and but every group of people has a vested interest in every individual in who's elected, right? So I think we'll probably see more of this, as you said in the first part of our conversation here, with these advocacy groups really trying to help Christians rally leading up to the election. What are there any special plans that the church has for this upcoming election right now? Anything different that they'll do? I know they've been doing this for a couple of years now.
Well, they plan to do it again in next year's presidential election. They collected about 6,000 ballots in 2020 and 13,335 ballots in 2022. So I'd say their goal would probably be to increase that number even more in 2024.
So we'll keep an eye on that and see where that goes. Just as we round out here on this discussion, are there any other important details when it comes to this? When you're the reporter covering something like this, there's a lot of things you encounter. So did you find any other pieces that you think people should know about?
Yes, I did. Gina Gleason identified California, Delaware, Hawaii, Idaho, Illinois, Maryland, Nevada, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, South Dakota, Tennessee, Utah, Vermont, Virginia, Washington, and Wyoming as the states where it's feasible for churches to do ballot collecting like her church does. It's not feasible in every state because of different laws on this when it comes to every state. One state, Alabama, bans ballot collecting altogether, while many other states have limits on who can return ballots on behalf of another person and how many a specific person can return. That would make it more difficult for churches to do it. And Ballotpedia, which is basically an encyclopedia on American politics, has more information on ballot collecting laws by state if anyone wants to check that out. And then Gleason also said that churches engaging in ballot harvesting cannot tell people which candidates to vote for and cannot ask people who they voted for. They have to take everyone's ballot. So that's important to
Well,
stress.
Well, that is That is interesting, and I'm really intrigued with all of the tension going on in the country right now, where this all heads next, and what we see other Christian groups doing, and just how the organization comes together with a big election coming upon us. Ryan, as always, appreciate your time today. Thanks for breaking it all down for us.
Thank you for having me.
Everyone else, make sure you head on over to Christian Post for all the news you need to hear and read, and we will be back next week with another episode of The Inside Story. We'll see you then.